One day a son came home and said, "I have good news and bad news. The good news is I got 18 out of 20 on my driver's test." His dad replied, "Great. Now what's the bad news?" The son replied, "They were pedestrians." And the math teacher asked, "If you had $1 and you asked your father for another, how many dollars would you have?" Then he raised his hand and answered, $1. The teacher shook her head. "You don't know your math, Vinny." Vinny replied, "You don't know my father." And a loaded minivan pulled up to the only remaining campsite. 4 children leapt from the vehicle and began feverishly unloading gear and setting up the tent. The boys rushed to gather firewood while the girls and their mother set up the camp stove and cooking utensils. A nearby camper marveled to the youngster's father. "That, sir, is some display of teamwork." The father replied, "I have a system. No one goes to the bathroom until camp is set up." Today we celebrate fathers. To you I say Happy Father's Day. And as we talk about fathers, we will take a look at a few scriptures along the way pertaining to fatherhood. But as we get into things, Erik Erikson, a pioneer in the world of child psychology, asserts that a father's love and a mother's love are qualitatively different. Fathers love more dangerously because their love is more expectant, more instrumental than a mother's love. A father brings unique contributions to the job of parenting a child that no one else can replicate. So let's look at some of the most compelling ways that a father's involvement makes a positive difference in their child's life. As we look at this, good fathers parent differently from mothers. The fathering expert Dr. Kyle Pruitt explains that fathers have a distinct style of communication and interaction with children. By 8 weeks of age, infants can tell the difference between their mother's and their father's interaction with them. And I can testify to that. I can remember watching my oldest, Kristen, when she was still an infant, and Nina went to the store. Guess what the infant did the entire time she was gone? She cried because there was a difference. It was not mom, it was dad. And this diversity in itself provides children with a broader, richer experience of contrasting relational interactions. Whether they realize it or not, children are learning by sheer experience that men and women are different and have different ways of dealing with life, other adults and children. This understanding is critical for their development. This is one of the reasons it is so critical that we have men in the home, that there is both father and mother there because of the different parenting styles and the impact that it has on the children. So as we look at this, if you would, good fathers play differently. Fathers tickle more. They wrestle. Some of them, it used to be they throw the children in the air while mother says, "Not so high." And fathers chase their children sometimes as playful, scary monsters. I still do that with Rowan occasionally. Fathering expert John Snary explains that children who roughhouse with their fathers learn that biting, kicking, and other forms of physical violence are not acceptable. They learn self-control by being told when enough is enough and when to settle down. Girls and boys both learn a healthy balance between timidity and aggression when the father is present in the home and actively involved. And so it is important because of that aspect in which they play differently. I mean, even in the animal world, you see that take place when the young are wrestling with the parent. And typically, the father will take a different approach even in that aspect. And so it is important that fathers do play differently with their children. It gives them that balance. And at the same time, during that process, if you would, good fathers build confidence. Go to any playground. Listen to the parents. Who is encouraging the kids to swing or climb just a little higher? ride their bike just a little faster, or throw just a little harder? Who is encouraging kids to be careful? Well, I think you know. Mothers protect, and dads encourage kids to push the limits. Oh, you can do that just a little bit more. I know it's tough. You can do it. Well, be careful, Junior. You don't want to get hurt. And you have that balance. And without that balance, well, let's just put it this way. Either of those parenting styles by themselves can be unhealthy. And I mean, we even encourage our children and help develop confidence by also letting them help us. I don't know, how many fathers here let the kids help you out in the garden when they were little? Yeah. I mean, Rowan, he can't wait. As a matter of fact, if I am out in the garden and he can't go out there, oh, he cries. Oh, the other day, when was it? It's actually yesterday. I mean, I went out to just check things. I wanted to see how things were doing. And it was chilly. The wind was chilly, and he didn't have anything long sleeve or anything like that. And all I was going to do is go out and look. And he wanted to go, and I said, no, you don't. It's too cold. It's chilly. You don't have any long sleeves. Boom. Meltdown just like that. He wanted to be out there in the middle of it, helping and learning. And when I've got him out there, I mean, he helps me plan. I point out things and show him what's going on. And so, either of these parenting styles by themselves, though, can be unhealthy. You know, one can tend toward encouraging risk without consideration of consequences. I mean, if mom wasn't there saying, be careful, and dad was there just constantly saying, go for it, what do you think's going to happen? Without the balance, they grow up thinking, well, I'm invincible, I can do anything, and what ends up happening then? Then you begin having heartbreak as the kids are injured all the time, sometimes very seriously. And then the other tends to avoid risk, which can fail to build independence and confidence, to where they are totally self-reliant, not self-reliant, but reliant on the parents. But together, they help children remain safe while expanding their experiences and increasing their confidences. I mean, this is one of the reasons why within the family, mom and mom don't work and dad don't work. You've got to have the balance, or the kids do not grow up with a balanced understanding of life, and they're either going to be taking risks that they shouldn't be taking, or they take no risk at all and have no confidence. See, as we begin to look at these differences between the parenting styles of mother and father, we begin to understand God has a plan for the fathers in the family and in the society around us. The other thing we find is, if you would, good fathers fill their children's lives with good, not evil. And this is so very important, especially in this day and age when we've got so much evil being thrown at the family. So many organizations out there trying to destroy the family because they know if they can destroy the family, they can destroy the society. And if they can destroy society, they can usher in anything they want to usher in. And what we see being ushered in is nothing short of evil in and of itself. Pure evil across the board. But good fathers bring good things into the lives of their children, and they protect them from the evil. And we see that lack of this in the homes today being played out across our nation. We've gone through a period of time where fathers were almost completely absent in the home for a long period of time. And we're reaping the consequences. I mean, understanding this concept of the parents bringing good in instead of evil, Jesus talks about this even and compares it to how God fathers us, if you would. Which of you fathers, if your son asks for a fish, will you give him a snake instead? Or if he asks for an egg, will you give him a scorpion? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give the Holy Spirit to those who ask Him? And so we see that understanding of providing good for our children by the way that God fathers us. the way that He provides for us. As a matter of fact, if you were to back up in that same chapter, you would read where Jesus was talking about all the needs of life. Clothing, food, housing, all the basics of life. And then He says, seek first the kingdom, and God will take care of the rest. He will give you those good things that you need. He will provide those things that you need. And so from Him we understand that example of giving good things to our children and providing for their needs. Also, if you would, good fathers communicate differently. A major study showed that when speaking to children, mothers and fathers are different. Mothers will simplify their words and speak on the child's level, typically. Men are not as inclined to modify their language for the child. The mother's way facilitates immediate communication. The father's way challenges a child to expand his or her vocabulary and linguistic skills, an important building block for academic success. So even in the way we talk to the kids is different. Mothers tend to put things down on the children's level so it's easy for them to quickly understand it. But dads, we have a tendency to keep it on the adult level and encourage them to learn to understand. And encourage them to expand their knowledge and their language skills. I mean, we don't necessarily do it intentionally, but that's the way we do things. That's the way we're wired. Kind of like when we talk about the difference between mothers and men and women when it comes to shopping. I mean, I always get a kick out of it, but it's for the most part true. You know, most women, not all women, but most women like to go shopping and take their time and browse, and they look at this, and then they look at that. Especially my daughter, Kristen. She'll look at this here, and then she'll look for it someplace else, and she'll come back and look at it again. And you might spend 3 hours with her looking for one thing as she shops around. Us guys, we already know what we want. We know what aisle it's in. We know exactly what it looks like. We want to go in. We want to find it. We want to shoot it. We want to bring it home, put it up on the wall, and we're done for the day. We've got our trophy. And so it is that difference in so many ways, even in the way we communicate with our kids. And if you would, good fathers discipline differently. I mean, talking about good fathers, I mean, the Hebrew writer tells us, if you would, moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in His holiness. Now, discipline is an important part of raising children. We understand that. And there is a difference in that discipline style among parents. I mean, educational psychologist Carol Gilligan tells us that fathers stress justice, fairness, and duty based on rules, while mothers stress sympathy, care, and help based on relationships. Fathers tend to observe and enforce rules systematically and sternly, teaching children the consequences of right and wrong. Mothers tend toward grace and sympathy, providing a sense of hopefulness. And again, either of these disciplinary approaches by themselves is not good, but together they create a healthy, proper balance. That yes, there are times that the sternness needs to be there. This is the way it's got to be, period. And then on the other hand, there are times that there needs to be a bit of grace. I mean, one of the things I really struggle with, and this is a difference between men and women, because I've seen this in other families too. I mean, especially in my kids. Mom says, "Do this." No response. Mom says, "Do this again." Still no response. Mom says, "I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2. And somewhere between 2 and 3, all of a sudden, butts get in gear. Dad says, do this. No response. I said, do this. Yes, sir. Big difference. But there needs to be a balance. There are times. I mean, one of the reasons I have trouble with this idea of counting to 3, especially with little ones, okay, especially with toddlers. You're out at, let's say, Walmart. And you come walking out, and the toddler starts to shoot away, and you say, stop, I'll count to what? Boom. It's too late. Counting to 3 doesn't work in a situation like that. And that's why that balance needs to be there, so that they understand there are times grace is acceptable, but there are other times when it is not. And so there is that difference in the disciplining process. And it's so important that that difference is there. You can't have, one of the things I see repeatedly nowadays is that you will have one parent discipline and the other parent do nothing. They try to play the good guy, bad guy route on things. You can't do that. That's not disciplining. And it makes it very easy for the kids to pit parents against each other. But at the same time, there are instances where when dad is laying down the law, mom needs to step in and say, let's calm down a bit. That's a little bit excess right now. As a matter of fact, the scriptures also give us a warning. If you would, Ephesians. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. And then also we read a very similar warning in Colossians, if you would. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. You see, because the reality is, sometimes a father is too stern and strict. And all of us are probably familiar with people that have had fathers like that have pushed the limits of being stern and strict to the point that there's just a total rebellion. And that's true of some mothers as well. And I believe what this warning is trying to tell us is, don't forget to let the children be children when they're young. Don't expect a toddler to act like an 8-year-old. Don't expect an 8-year-old to act like and have the responsibilities of a teenager. And don't expect a teenager to act like a 30-year-old. As a matter of fact, most teenagers act like 3-year-olds anymore, if you know what I mean. Allow children to be children according to their maturity level. Don't take their childhood from them and expect young children to behave and act like adults. This helps in other areas of growth also, in all areas of their life. They need that childhood. They need to be able to grow according to their own pace. But yet I have seen so many parents that have toddlers or even early school children wanting them to act like adults. They're not adults. They're not to that maturity level yet. Don't expect it of them. And then if you would, good fathers prepare children for the real world. Involved dads help children see that attitudes and behaviors do have consequences. For instance, fathers are more likely than mothers to tell their children that if they are not nice to others, kids will not want to play with them. Or if they don't do well in school, they will not get into a good college or secure a desirable job. Fathers help children prepare for the reality and harshness of the world. And also by providing chores for their children, which teach them responsibility and how to work and provide. I know one of the things that I see that has been happening so often in society today, and that is children are not being taught to work. They sit around and this is what they do all day. Playing the games. couch potatoes. No expectations. I mean, it's one thing to let them have their childhood, but a part of their childhood is teaching them responsibility and teaching them how to work. I mean, one of the things that amazes me, one of the things I believe we could truly learn from the Amish community, a child, when it is old enough to walk, is out in the fields working, doing what they are capable of doing at that age. And yet you find they also provide playtime for the kids. They give them the balance, but they teach them to work. But yet we've got a society today that has a bunch of young people that have come up through that have no idea what work is about. That's one of the reasons that we've got many places today that can't seem to find anybody that wants to work. There is no work ethic. They can't get enough people to work. People want the money, but they don't want to do anything for it. I mean, I forget what company it was I was reading about, where they had employees having meltdowns because they were going to have to start working 8 hours a day, put in a full day's work. And then, if you would, good fathers provide a proper look at the world of men. Oh, we're struggling with that today. Society has been trying to emasculate itself for the last 50 years, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. The reality is, regardless of what society wants to say, men and women are different. They don't just look different, they are different. They eat differently. They're supposed to dress differently. They don't even do that anymore. They cope with life differently. Girls and boys who grow up with a father are more familiar and more secure with the curious world of men. Girls with involved married fathers are more likely to have healthier relationships with the opposite sex because they learn from their fathers how proper men act toward women. They know which behaviors are inappropriate. They know how a proper husband treats his wife. They learn those values. They also have a healthy familiarity with the world of men. They don't wonder how a man's facial stubble feels or what it's like to be hugged by strong arms. And this knowledge builds emotional security and safety from the exploitation of predatory males. And boys who grow up with dads are less likely to be violent. They have their masculinity affirmed and learn from their fathers how to channel their masculinity and strength in positive ways. Good fathers help sons understand proper male sexuality, hygiene, and behavior in age-appropriate ways. And as noted by sociologist David Popenoe explains, fathers are far more than just second adults in the home. Involved fathers, especially biological fathers, bring positive benefits to their children that no other person is as likely to bring. And then, if you would, good fathers lead spiritually. The spiritual well-being of the family is the highest priority on a father's list. And they set the priorities of the family and teach the children what is most important in life. They teach them that a relationship with Christ is eternal and must be our highest priority above all else, and all other things are temporary. We read in Proverbs 22, if you would, train a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not turn away from it. Key word, train. You see, we've got too many parents today that want the faith to be passed along by osmosis, that somehow just hanging around parents that believe that somehow they're going to believe and follow in their steps and things like that. It doesn't work that way. A child has to be trained to be faithful. And then we come back to that passage we read before, Ephesians 6, that has the admonition with it. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training, there's that word again, and instruction of the Lord. It is a deliberate effort. It is a deliberate focus to steer that child toward Christ. Not hope that somehow along the way they find their way there. It is a deliberate direction pointing. Focusing that child's attention on the things of God and steering them in that direction. Why are these roles so important for the fathers? What was God's purpose for structuring the household in this way? Well, He gives us the answer to that. In Malachi chapter 2, if you would. Has not the Lord made them one? In flesh and spirit they are His. And why one? Because He was seeking godly offspring. That is God's structure for the family, because He wants our children to be faithful. He wants our children to be godly. And let me share something with you. We can't bring up godly children if we're not prepared to lead godly lives. God wants us to train up our children in faith because He wants our children to be godly believers who follow Him. And yet we've got so many parents along the way who have been trying to let the church handle raising their children for them in the faith. Oh, they will see that they get to the doctor. They'll see that they get to this, and they'll see that they get to that. But when it comes to the things of the Spirit, they will leave it up to the church. Take them to the church and let the church teach them. Well, that is if we got time to get to the church. If there isn't something more important. The temporary things, we get concerned about those, but the eternal things, they fall on the back burner when they should be our focal point. That which is most important. That which is the things that we put before the children day after day. And one of the important things we need to understand, I know you've still got a young one, okay? But for those of us that all of our children are grown and now the home got their own, guess what? God didn't let us off the hook either. I don't have the scriptures up there, but in Deuteronomy He tells us twice that we are to pass it on to the generation beyond the generation. It's not just to our kids, it's to our children and our children's children and those who come after them. Our responsibility doesn't end when the child moves out the door. It is our responsibility to pass it on to the grandchildren as well. God sees you as the patriarch of the family. You are still the head of your household, even though part of your household might be in another house someplace else. It is still up to you to do everything you can to pass the faith along even to your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. And that responsibility ends when God takes you home. And for many today, this is challenging because they didn't have that godly influence in their lives growing up. They've been influenced by the world instead of by the Word. They struggle with doubts and confusion. We've got too many fathers out there who aren't sure about the faith. Many want to believe, but for them, amid all of the so-called science, they struggle with the idea of there even being a God. And if there is, how can we know there's a God? Fact is, God reveals Himself everywhere if we choose to look. And that's the key, if we choose to look. I remember Warner Moore telling me in his early days when he was a principal and the superintendent told him he needed to do an assessment of the teachers. And he had one that, well, let's just say the teacher was a challenge. And he was trying to figure out, how am I going to do an honest assessment of this teacher? I mean, I've got some personal feelings going on here about some things. And he finally said, I decided I was going to look for the good. He said, once I began to look for the good, he said, I began to see things that I'd missed because I wasn't looking for them. You see, we tend to find what we're looking for. If you look for the bad, guess what you find all around you? The bad. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that the media is doing right now. They're trying to build up the bad, so that the only thing you see is the bad, and you get all upset, and they can manipulate your emotions by making you feel bad. You see all the bad. But if you look for the good, guess what you'll start to find? The good. And if you look for God, you will find Him. The psalmist wrote, if you would, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. God's creation speaks of the glory of God. And God told us in Jeremiah, if you would, when you look for me with all your heart, you will find me. I think that's one of the things that we see happening is people aren't finding God because they don't want to find God. Because they understand if they find God, then there's going to have to be a change in their life. There's going to have to be a different focus on things. There's going to have to be a different approach to things. And we don't want to find God because God's going to tell us that the way I'm living is wrong. And so the easiest thing for me to do is say, oh, well, there's no God out there. But the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans, if you would, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Understand what he's saying? You've got no excuse for convincing yourself there is no God. If you will take an honest look at everything around you, the beauty, the complexity, the way everything works, if you will take an honest look at it, you cannot help but find God. He has made Himself evident and plain in all of His creation. And we are without excuse. So for those who want to truly know if God exists, for those who truly want to find Him, find out if He is there, if you would, God has revealed Himself everywhere if they will only look and see. So good fathers who are spiritual leaders in their homes are an essential part of the family unit and essential to a stable community. You see, a stable community has a foundation of stable families. And one of the things that those who are striving to destroy society are doing is they are doing everything they can to pull families apart. Because they know if they can destroy the family, they can create an unstable society. And when they create an unstable society, they can do whatever they want to do. Father's masculine influence provides the needed balance in the instruction and upbringing of the children. Their impact on children cannot be overemphasized. The more we allow the family to be pulled apart in this nation, the more we see the rise of violence and poverty. God established the family unit for a reason. He knows what works best, and His plan for raising the children includes a good father who is involved in the training up of the children physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually within the household. And there's something we need to understand. We've had the commands to train up the children, train up the children, train up the children. They're commands. You know what that means? Fathers, grandfathers, we will be held accountable for how we fathered our children. We will have to answer for how we performed as fathers. Jesus is calling us to be the fathers that we were meant to be. God is calling us to train up our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to be faithful and godly. He's commanded it. He hasn't suggested it. He's commanded it. And He will hold us accountable. What do you need to do beginning today to be the father, the grandfather, or even the mother, grandmother that God has called you to be when it comes to raising your children and your grandchildren and being involved in their lives? What do you need to do to fulfill that command? To raise up the godly offspring that God wants. Would you begin doing that today? Understanding that the impact is eternal. It's not temporary. Don't worry about all the temporary things going on around us in life. Focus on what is eternal. Put that first above all else. Everything else will fall into place. What do you need to begin to do today?